In Dimension Force, there's tons of new things coming out to change up the game, but one thing that doesn't change, Pen Best Deck. And here's why. It's been a hot minute since we got some dedicated pendulum support, and in Dimension Force, we've got some hot pendulum support in the form of Odd Eyes and Performapals. That's right, the pals are back and they're ready to swing the pendulum. And I'm ready to introduce the new cast of Performapals and Odd Eyes, so make sure you guys smash that thumbs up button, hit subscribe, ding that notification bell, and let's get to it. First of all, the newest member of the Performapal lineup, Performapal Gentrude. He leads the opening act by placing monsters where they need to go. By destroying this card, you get to place one of your Performapal Pendulum monsters into the Pendulum zone straight from the deck. If this guy is in your extra deck, you can discard a Pendulum monster, put him back into your hand, and if it's an Odd Eyes or Performapal monster on your Pendulum zone, you get to add that back to your hand as well, so you can really fix up the scale. Considering that he is a scale 8, that's gonna give you a wide range of monsters to Pendulum summon. And while Gentrude is acting as a Pendulum Scale, he does have a Pendulum effect to add an Odd Eyes card straight from the deck to your hand, as long as the other scale is a Ladyange, and the only monsters you control are Pendulum monsters, or you control no monsters at all. And speaking of Ladyange, Performapal Ladyange is the other cast member being added into the Performapal lineup. Performapal Ladyange is essentially the new draw power for the Performapal deck. Simply by discarding herself and another Performapal monster, you get to draw 2 cards, very similar to Dark Lord Eggshell in some sense. However, her end goal is not to end up being in the graveyard, but instead to be rescaled back onto the Pendulum zone. She can do that on a later turn if you didn't use the draw effect, because you can only use one of her effects once per turn, and simply by controlling a Gentrude or an Odd Eyes card, you will be able to place her onto the Pendulum Scale from the graveyard. Our next Pendulum monster is making its first card type debut. This is going to be our first Ritual Pendulum card, Odd Eyes Pendulumgraph Dragon, and this is also our first secret reveal of this archetype. One of the biggest questions you might think is like, oh, do I have to Ritual Summon out this card first? And the answer is no. You have the option to either Ritual Summon it out with Odd Eyes Advent or any other avenue you have for Ritual Summoning a generic monster, or you can just straight up Pendulum Summon him out, because based off of its card text, it must either be Ritual Summon or Pendulum Summon from your hand. Being a level 7 Ritual monster, it makes it pretty easy to search out whether it be its Odd Eyes name in the card text, or you can search it out with Preparation of Rites being a level 7 Ritual monster. And this is a monster I probably want on the field because it carries one of the best effects in the game, the ability to negate spell cards and spell effects, simply by, well, chaining to it and moving this card from the field onto the Pendulum zone. That seems pretty easy, and why would you want to Ritual Summon out this card and run the Ritual spell? Well, it does pay off in the long run, because if this card is Ritual Summon and moved to the scale for the negation of a spell card or a spell effect, then you can summon out an Odd Eyes monster from your extra deck, which could lead to another level of negation through Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. And even when this card is on the scale, it doesn't seem like you want to sit there, because as long as you're playing a single copy of a Ritual spell, you will be able to add this card back into your hand to add a Ritual spell straight from the deck or graveyard into your hand as well. Next, we got another member of the Odd Eyes family of Odd Eyes Wing Dragon. Like many Synchro Pendulum hybrids, this card needs to be destroyed while it's on the field as a monster to be placed onto the Pendulum Scale. With a scale of 10, you get to basically Pendulum Summon anything 9 and below, and that's more or less most of Yu-Gi-Oh! For that matter, and does have a pretty strong Pendulum Scale effect, where you're basically going to win most of your battles, because before damage calculation, if your monster battles an opponent's monster, you get to gain their attack. Very powerful stuff, for sure. Now, as a monster being summoned, that's going to be a bit more difficult, because it has a very specific requirement. You need to have a Clear Wing non-tuner monster, and you need a Dark Tuner. So the recipe is pretty specific, and as for the amount of monsters that carry the name Clear Wing, there's quite a few. However, most of them are quite over-leveled for the job, since this monster is only level 8, so you only really have the option of Clear Wing Synchro Dragon and Clear Wing Fast Dragon as your main option. And in terms of its effects on the field, it does have an Ignition effect to basically target a monster on the field and then negate its effect until the end of the turn. That's Ignition, that's not a quick effect based off of the card text. And then you also have the quick effect, which is in the battle phase. You can destroy everything that's level 5 and higher. And that's actually pretty good, because that's going to take care of most boss monsters and clear them out of the way. And the last monster we're going to talk about in this lineup is a Link monster that you guys have all been waiting for, Beyond the Pendulum. She is the Link 2 Pendulum support that you guys have been waiting for a very long time. And if you summon her into the extra monster zone, then you get to pay a low price of 1200 life points. Yes, it is pretty steep, but you get to add any pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. There's no restrictions on what type of pendulum monster it is, so that's also very good. However, the slight caveat is, after you do Link Summon her and use that particular effect, until you Pendulum Summon after the fact, you will not be able to activate any monster effect, so that's a pretty big restriction. So probably save your Pendulum Summon until you summon her off first. And the second thing is your Pendulum Scales have their effects negated. Basically, it's shutting off most of your effects related to monsters until you Pendulum Summon. After you Pendulum Summon, all your effects goes live again. And on top of that, if you do Pendulum Summon monsters with different levels at the same time, she can pop 2 cards on the field. So that's pretty good. She does target them. You can target 2 cards on the field and destroy them. And if you have scales that you don't necessarily need, you can destroy those as well. You know, you can pop a Gentrude for that matter and perhaps setting a new scale. So that's what you can use her for. And she's just an amazing card in general. And eventually you can probably just link her off and go into your strategy even further. And now we have spells and traps. The only Pendulum spell card we're looking into is Extra Pendulum, and by its namesake, we're getting ourselves an Extra Pendulum Summon. The additional Pendulum Summon coming from this card, there's no real restriction aside from where that monster can come from. It doesn't stop you from battling, doesn't stop you from anything. The only thing is, those monsters that you're summoning out for the second Pendulum Summon that you're performing has to only come from the extra deck. So if you use your first Pendulum Summon to set up a really powerful Link monsters and giving you a ton of arrows to work with, then your next Pendulum Summon is to summon all those materials back. So this card can feel like a soul charge level card, which is really powerful. But if your board is not correctly set up, then this might not be the card you want to add with Duelist Alliance, because Duelist Alliance can search this card because it does carry the pendulum in its card text name. And Pendulum Scale. This is a trap card with 4 different effects based off of the difference between your 2 Pendulum Scale numbers. Okay, I'm going to have to read this one. So if you have 0 difference in your scale numbers, then you get to destroy 2 spell trap cards on the field, which could be 2 of your opponents, 2 of your own. You know, open up your scales, blow up 1 on each side. You know, it's up to you. If the difference is 1, 2, or 3, you get to add a level 2, 3, or 4 Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. If your difference is 4, 5, or 6, then you could add a level 5, 6, or 7 Pendulum monster from your hand. So this is kind of like the ability to search for Pendulum monsters. And if it's 7 or higher, return 2 of your Pendulum Zone monsters to your hand, basically 2 of those cards, and then you can special summon a Pendulum monster from your hand. So that's going to be able to summon out the things that you just added. Or maybe you have a really big monster that you kind of want to shortcut onto the field. That's also an option for you. And you can only activate 1 of these per turn. So it's kind of a neat card. I'm wondering if there's some shortcut strategy to put up some really nasty boss monster with this. The potential is there, but you guys can figure it out. And here's the additional support refresher for you guys. Odd Eyes, they're a very diverse strategy. They have every single summoning method available. They can have high damage output. They have negation boards that they can put out as their end boss monsters. But to focus it all down, you need to find the right balance. And to get you that level of synergy and balance, you gotta try some of these cards, guys. So this is a list of cards that you guys can try out. We have Performapal Skullcrobat Joker. Search all for any of the most popular pendulum archetypes, such as the Performapals, Odd Eyes, and Magicians. We have Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer, one of the best pendulum summons, help you get your cards into your hand, pop off scales that are already used that are no longer useful to you. Really good synergy. Then we have Performapal Odd Eyes Dissolver, a quick access to Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, performing a fusion for you, and getting the Odd Eyes Vortex will make your place feel that much safer. We also have Luster Pendulum, the Draco Slayer, helping you pop up your other scale so they can add another copy of it. And if you pop something like Gentrude, you get to add another scale onto the field, so you can use that to kind of dig stuff out of your deck. Spiral Flame Strike and Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon to help you search your Odd Eyes cards. We have Astrograph Sorcerer. If you're going to be popping cards, you can add more cards back with this. And speaking of the Magicians now, we have the Magicians. Harmonizing Magicians is probably one of the Magicians you definitely want to play, especially when it comes to Beyond the Pendulum. having that searched out, and then Pendulum summoning out this particular monster is going to load your field with a ton of monsters. And one spell card that I definitely recommend is going to be Duelist Alliance, because you can search for anything with the name of Pendulum. That's all I got for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two about the Pendulum support coming out and figured out the 2 secret rares in this particular archetype. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up and hit subscribe, ding that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one.